Today, we are digging into one of the most important scientific discoveries of the 20th century. It's a story about a brilliant scientist, a fierce rivalry, and a single photograph that literally changed the world.
So let me just start with a question. What if the blueprint for all of life, the secret to our DNA, was all unlocked because of one grainy, black and white picture? It sounds like something out of a movie, right? Well, it's not. It's exactly what happened.
And this is that picture. It's called Photograph 51. And this is the scientist who made it, Rosalind Franklin. Now, I know, to you and me, it might just look like a blurry X, but to a scientist who knew what they were looking at, this image was the final, undeniable clue they needed to solve the structure of DNA. But you can't really get the importance of the photograph until you understand the incredible scientist who took it. And her journey? Well, it was a constant fight against a system that was not built for women like her. You see, Rosalind Franklin knew what she wanted to do from the very beginning. By the time she was 15, she was dead set on being a scientist. This was even after her own father told her it was unsuitable for a woman. But she pushed back, found one of the very few schools that would even teach girls physics and chemistry, and she earned her spot at Cambridge University. And after Cambridge, her career just took off. She started out working on the structure of coal, publishing papers all on her own. Then she moves to Paris, and there she becomes an absolute master of this really difficult technique called X-ray diffraction. She was so good, in fact, that by 1951, King's College in London recruited her to lead a research unit to solve the biggest biological puzzle of the era. And that puzzle, of course, was the structure of DNA. So Franklin shows up at King's College, one of the best research institutions in the world, totally ready to crack this thing. But the environment she walked into, well, let's just say it was anything but collaborative. It was instantly tangled up in friction and rivalry. See, Franklin was brought in to lead the DNA project using her X-ray skills. But there was another scientist, Maurice Wilkins, who was already working on it. Nobody ever clarified who was actually in charge. And so right from the start, the atmosphere was tense and competitive. And that tension would have huge consequences down the line. Despite the tough environment, Franklin's incredibly careful work led to a huge breakthrough. By controlling the humidity around her DNA samples with pinpoint precision, she figured out that DNA actually exists in two different forms. There was a dry, crystalline A form and a wet, hydrated B form. This was a critical distinction, something nobody else had realized. And it was her work on that wet B form of DNA that led to her most famous and, her most controversial discovery. She had the data. She had the proof. But there was another team running the same race, and they were about to get their hands on the final piece of her puzzle. So, in May of 1952, after meticulously setting up all her gear and blasting a tiny DNA fiber with X-rays for 62 hours straight, she and her student developed this image, Photograph 51. The only reason it's so clear is because of her incredible skill. It was, without a doubt, the best picture of DNA that existed anywhere in the world. So, what are we even looking at here? Well, think of X-ray diffraction as taking a picture of a molecule's shadow. The pattern of that shadow tells you its shape. And that unmistakable X pattern, that is the definitive textbook signature of a helix. To anyone who knew what they were looking at, this picture basically screamed spiral staircase. But her work was so much more than just one cool picture. From this photo, Franklin took exact measurements. She calculated that the big phosphate backbone had to be on the outside, not the inside. She figured out there were two strands, and she nailed down the precise dimensions of the helix. These weren't guesses, they were hard numbers. Any correct model had to match her data. And this is where the story gets really controversial. Franklin was getting ready to leave King's College, and her data started moving around without her permission. First, her own student showed Photograph 51 to her colleague Maurice Wilkins. Then Wilkins turns around and shows that same photo to James Watson, one of her main competitors, all without Franklin's knowledge or consent. And on top of that, Watson and his partner Francis Crick also got a look at a confidential report she'd written, a report that had all of her precise measurements in it. So when the big discovery was published in the famous journal Nature in 1953, the order of the articles tells you everything you need to know. First up, you had Watson and Crick's paper on their theoretical model. Second, you had a paper from Wilkins with some supporting data. And published last, almost like an afterthought, was Franklin's paper, the one with the actual foundational evidence, including Photograph 51.
Her work was positioned as just confirming their theory, not the basis for it.
In their landmark paper, Watson and Crick never formally cited Franklin's unpublished data, the data that was the bedrock of their model. And that's a huge deal. The failure to give credit for essential, confidential evidence is considered a serious breach of scientific ethics. Put simply, they had the answer because she had done the work. Now, you might think that's the end of the story, but it's not. Despite the bitterness of what happened with the DNA discovery, Franklin's career was far from over. What she did next just proved her brilliance and her resilience all over again. She didn't just move on. She went and pioneered a whole new field. After leaving King's, she went to Birkbeck College and completely pivoted to studying viruses. And right away, she starts doing groundbreaking work, using her X-ray skills to map out the structure of the tobacco mosaic virus. She became a world leader in virology, just like that. But then, tragedy struck. Right at the absolute peak of her career, Rosalind Franklin died of ovarian cancer in 1958. She was only 37 years old. And it's widely believed that all those years of constant exposure to X-rays might have been what caused her illness. 4 years after she died, in 1962, the Nobel Prize for the discovery of DNA's structure was awarded to James Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins. Nobel Prizes aren't awarded posthumously, so Rosalind Franklin's name was not mentioned. But in a way, her legacy did eventually get recognized. In 1982, her close collaborator from her virus work, Aaron Klug, won the Nobel Prize for continuing the research she had started. He himself said he was sure that if she had lived, she would have shared that prize right alongside him. And in the end, even her competitors had to admit it. Years later, Francis Crick himself stated very clearly that all the really relevant experimental work on the X-ray diffraction patterns of DNA came from Franklin's laboratory. Rosalind Franklin's story is such a powerful reminder that these huge, world-changing theories are often built on top of incredibly careful foundational work that sometimes goes unacknowledged. And it leaves us with a really important question. In the race for the next big discovery, whose photograph 51 are we overlooking right now?